That's right. There's a lots of cancel 2020. Definitely, I heard that. Definitely heard that. We can't wait.
Yeah.
We're actually gearing up to do our planning, so I'm actually really excited to see what you have to say today.
All right, nice.
Nice to see you again, Becky. We had historically done big room planning in person, and then when February, March, I had a team in Irvine, California that had to go into lockdown, and so we did an on-the-fly PI planning event using Zoom, and it actually went quite well given we had already done it in person. We have another team that we're struggling with because they've never done big room planning, and we merged with a company that is kind of blowing their mind with how to do sort of quarterly planning with a whole company versus traditional like agile development with a small scrum team. So that's our situation.
Nice. That is cool. We have lots of stories here then. Let's kick it off. So this is a part of the strategic planning with the focus on strategic product planning. And just a little bit intro of myself. I am the founder and CEO of Dragonboat. It is a platform for strategic product management and, obviously building product across the product organization. I personally led portfolio product management, built the first one for PayPal and then for a couple of companies. And I established the strategic product planning for multiple companies, especially in the context of the product and the agile world. There were, traditional finance-led ones that we tweaked it in a way that works for a agile and product management context. And with a lot of the learnings and challenges, and I decided to start a Dragonboat to really help us to go through the process and be able to carry that all the way from the vision to execution and tasks. So that's the context of why I got started. And today, Dragonboat is actually adopted by companies in 20 countries and all sizes. So with that, we're gonna jump into topics, what it is, why we need it, and how do we conduct it in a way that works in an agile and responsive way, not the traditional format we adjusted to work for today. And then we also will touch upon the toolings that you could be used to make it easier, which is Dragonboat. Obviously, you can use spreadsheets and PowerPoints for that as well. So this is a interesting thing. I got into conversations with a lot of people on, hey, we can't do annual planning. We're agile. The annual planning is taking too long. I think it's gonna change it anyway. Why we should go about doing that? And the same thing can be said for quarterly planning or sprint planning. The point is that for us to go from point A to point B, there are many routes. We are onboarded collectively as a company, and who should be bringing along to where and how do we get there is something actually every company struggles. Let me tell you one of the life story that I went through in one of the company I worked at and built their first strategic product planning process for them. When I went to the company, it's growing really well. It's relatively small, but it's growing really well. And the goal is just raise a round of funding. And the goal is to grow 80% in revenue next year. And so it looks all good, but when you look at the product backlogs, there are tons of stuff. So we literally have spreadsheets with 16 tabs, and every product managers has their own tab, has the list of the things that we're trying to do. And then if you look at in detail, you realize there's no clear theme. When we went up to the leadership level, then we are talking about how we're gonna go from here to 80% revenue growth next year. And the sales team said, we have the technology, we have the platform, we can build this new product in this adjacent area from what we have today. And there's a huge market in that space. so we can, you know, take over the legacy and then grow there. And then we already have 80% technology. We just need to put a UI, put a reporting, and then we can pack it. So then the BD people will say, no. You know, the easiest way we should do is take existing product and remove the UI, white label it, so we can find, you know, we already lined up 6 top distributors so they can white label our product. They can easily get us to 80%. Where from the product team and the professional service team perspective say, look, our product take a lot of time to implement. Every customer, we have the professional service takes 3 to 6 months. And then we cannot realize the revenue until we've done that. It's very costly, and then we can realize revenue. What we should do is build solutions. The solution we sit on top of the platform we already have and take what we already implemented, customized for different product markets. For example, we can categorize them, say, financials and retail. Then we can sell faster, sell more. And then we can realize, if we can realize revenue, 50% faster, we already halfway there, and then we can, adding more, right? Sound familiar? So that's how we use that opportunity to educate the teams on why and how we need to do strategic planning. It is not that things won't change along the way, but we have to start somewhere collectively. So that's basically what we start to work on. Is first we have to so just to pull back a little bit. When we talk about strategic product planning, in most companies these days, back in the days it will be 3-year strategy, 1-year plan. That's how we implemented it back in PayPal about almost 20 years ago. And during the Agile transformation about 15 years ago, we changed it to 1-year strategy and a quarterly execution, because the pace that just work much better than 3-year, 1 year. But if you cannot do quarterly strategy, that's just a little too small of a focus. So 1 year and a quarterly turn out to be a really good cadence. Now for your company, depend on the size, it could be 6 months and a 2 month. It could be something like 1 year and a quarterly, or you could do 2 years and a half year, depend on the size and the speed. But that kind of cadence, typically it would be a longer horizon vision, and you break it down throughout the period of time. But the first thing, what we realize is truly understand the market segments we're going to go after. I know that when I say that, you feel like, hey, I'm just a PM or I'm just a director. I don't really get to decide on that. But the interesting thing is that if you don't drive a decision for that, it is very difficult to go down the path for other activities. So around this time last year, I was helping a fintech company. I won't say names. One of the fastest growing, biggest fintech unicorns in this world, obviously in US. They are trying to work on a strategic planning for technology roadmap. And now think about it, strategic planning doesn't have to be for the whole company. It could be just a big enough product area as well. And that product area was just tech, right? Tech want to do strategic planning, and then they don't typically have product management. So they're like, hey, how should we go about this? Because our CTOs, our VP engineer, all of them come out with a list of 25 initiatives. And so they all have very strong opinions on that. So the way we go about this is, okay, let's look at all of them. That's because everyone's passionate about that, right? So we spend the first half day to go through 4 of them. And I let it run for a while, because it's hard to say you should do this way until they go through that. So people feel exhausted. So we only go through 4 out of the 25. There's a lot more. I say, well, why don't we flip around, right? Let's flip around this. Let's talk about what is our goal and how do we. So then from there, we'll say, what is where we are, what is blocking, what are the key things that will help us to achieve our goals. And then if we agree on that, we can use that framework to put these 25 things or even more things into it. So we actually flip things upside down, become a much easier conversation. The much easier conversation is something that people asking, well, everyone knows the goal, right? So we need to be able to support X amount of volume of transactions, X amount of the uptimes, and being able to integrate things is so much faster, and so forth. It's funny because every company, if you go talk to them, almost the same thing. Then the interesting happened is nobody agree on the current state, on whether we are having trouble on it's the transaction platform, it's our partner, it's our pipeline, it's our API. So that is actually the most valuable thing to discuss, is where we are, where the problems are. So that was a good conversation. Once everyone figure out the problem, the 6 key areas of improvement, then everything just flow right into that. These are things we could be doing, and then you can prioritize things going to each of the buckets and so forth. Then the rest of the conversation, deciding on initiatives and estimating them and then go cross team, became very straightforward and fairly quick. So what I'm trying to highlight here is time and again, what we notice that if we start strategic planning, the reason we have strategic planning is to have a clean slate, not look at a backlog of X number of things that could be done. We will always start with where we are, where we want to be, and how do we go from here to there? Because aligning how we go from here to there is a big part of the goal of the big room planning. Once we decide on that, everyone say, this is where we want to go, here's the key focuses, then we can put initiatives and projects and features and all that good stuff inside of that. Then we're going to estimate the effort, understanding the budget and headcount allocation, and then we take it into the execution, to the next level of discussion. So I'm going to pause here for a while. I know that was a lot of stories and abstract things at the same time. Question from anyone? Comments, questions, your war stories. Was it helpful?
I have one question, Becky. Earlier you were talking about like the long range planning horizon relative to your short term planning, like the 1-to-4 ratio. It sounded like, I was just going to ask you, can you use a ratio like 1-to-4 if 2 companies merge? Like I was saying earlier, we got one team that's on a totally different mindset for what those cycle times are. Right. So I wondered if a 4-to-1 ratio works, given we're kind of we have like what I call impedance mismatch until I can get the teams farther down the track. Right.
It is a very interesting that I would say 1-to-4 is a very commonly used. It's funny. You kind of just went ahead on this one. I'll just show you here. And it just in general, how, whatever we do, product organization, engineering organization, in the end, we're part of the business. And, we can't think of it as a standalone silo R&D anymore, right? These days, every company is a technology company. So the business typically on a financial cycle operates in this model, right? So you have annual quarter, and then quarter month, and then month to week. It's like a 3 and a 4, somewhat just like either 3 or 4 ratio that would just work somehow magically. I think David Sachs used to be the COO at the PayPal. I think he always say, we do quarterly because it's kind of seasoned. So somehow it just works.
That's a really interesting slide, because what I would add is not only is maybe 1-to-4 ratio helpful for me when I'm in this motion of blending 2 separate companies with different time horizons on strategy and execution, but you also brought up another dimension, like aligning this to rhythm of the business, I call it. So if you're already having quarterly planning with your board, you're already having an annual trade show, or you're already in a 2-week sprint with Scrum teams, then you would align this to those rhythms, right? Not just blindly with a ratio. I gotcha. Very helpful. Thank you, Becky.
Right. You're welcome. Actually, I have a blog on that. I'm happy to share that after that as well, talking about the cadence. And for every company, more than happy to. For every company, that cadence there are like almost 4 elements of a successful organization, right? The first successful organization is people. You have to have the people, then the people would have to have skills. So you have to train them and then learn. And then you will have the organization, right? So the process and the organization, how people work together, and then finally the cadence. So any one of them missing is not going to be a high performing organization. There was a comment, sorry. Question from anyone?
Yeah, I think I have a question around the cross-functional alignment, which you alluded to earlier. I think kind of the question around that is how to influence that conversation, right? Because I think a lot of the time with cross-func, especially when there's multiple layers at play, directors, VPs, oftentimes it's a bit of a political minefield.
Right.
Yeah, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on how, if someone is, in my case, an individual contributor who is kind of mid-level, but like I'm a product lead, but I report to my VPs and such. So there's only so much I can say and trying to find a tactful way to influence that conversation.
Right, and that's an excellent question. That's why, in a way, that having a framework here tie things together, make the conversation a lot easier. So, I think a lot of you probably face that there's something called, quote unquote, called a politics or whatnot, right? In company, one of the politics is to say people want to work on this feature, this initiative versus the others. It's their pet initiative, right? I think sometimes it is, but quite often people think that initiative A is just much more impactful initiative B, not because they like A more than B, because given the information that individual has, that is the best solution that individual believe. And everything is because there's no context. And if you talk to an engineer, let's go to the, the team level, right? They have things in their sprint, and then they look at the things that goes down the list of A, B, C, D as a part of sprint planning they decide to do. That's the priority. That's the context they have. Now, when we expand this context a little bit more, then you have more context on what is our objective and what is our initiative. Once you started to, that's how the strategic product planning happens, right? Strategic product planning happens going back to here, say, if we agree on the future state, current state, and the key opportunity, which is almost like objectives and a strategy, right? Then what we will do is that we would not only we take the decision on objectives and strategy, we also talk about allocation. And this is something that it's the prioritization before prioritization. Because today when we prioritize things, it only gives us the linear saying A is more important than B. That's using this example. Two cross-functional team, right? So let's say I am on the platform team and I have a consumer product managers come to my platform team, say, hey, I need this API to be revamped so that I have this big launch to Europe, right? And then you get this, reporting team coming to the same platform team, say, hey, I need to have the other set of API exposed to integrate with our data warehouses so that we can have these reports because we need those insights to decide on pricing strategy. Now, let's just say they need the same number of engineers that you have. Now, how do you compete against them? Plus the things you need to do. So now it's like you can't compare your features and theirs and so on and so forth. That it's just apple to orange comparison. So this strategic planning process is not only we will say for companies we have these goals, it also say how we achieve these goals. We also say the allocation. So maybe we'll jump in with an example. All right. So thank you, Lisa. And so basically what many of you guys probably have something like that, right? So hopefully you organize your initiatives or your product in a way that around the goals. If you're not, whenever you have a conversation of contentions, you don't have enough resources, you would go by looking at your estimate and effort, and also looking at your allocation. So you can do, obviously you can do pivot tables as well. It's a similar concept that you start with the allocation. So there are multiple ways to look at allocation. You can look at allocation by objectives to see where you allocate your resources, so that when you have over allocation in certain areas, then you can say, hey, these areas over allocated. Let's using this example, retain SMB customers is way over allocated, and therefore they can give up some of their needs and wants, so then we can free up resources to the other teams that are competing for the same. So if we would come back to the, let's say the objective is to retain SMB customers, and these are all the product features coming from different consumer and operation. So then you can discuss how these, the allocation here can be trade-off, right? Or you will say, I actually want to have allocation report based on the teams. I want to know which team has more than the others. And then here you go, you can see the teams and then whether allocated more or less. The consumer has, more than the others. If you line up with your original strategic planning allocation, that will be the guideline for you to say, hey, at the company level, we are allocating, let's say a third, a third, a third. That's not a best strategy, but let's just use that. A third, a third, a third for the 3 teams. So then we can have a conversation on how we can prioritize within them if you over budget, under budget. Now, again, it's not like, it's not a hard and fast rule, but that's one of the prioritization before prioritization. At least if you still have your allocation, then it's easier conversation. If you go beyond, then we should have a heart-to-heart conversation. Say, look, consumer and operations and my platform will compete to the same. And this one's over allocation, but it's more urgent, which one we can trade off. So just give us another data point on whether we should and how we prioritize across different teams that don't necessarily within our own control.
I love this. Thank you for sharing, Becky. I think this to me speaks to your point, the prioritization matrix or prioritization framework, as well as using that to make apple-to-apple comparison and really aligning that closely with the strategic goals, right? And that's right. Hopefully something, that's not landmine, not political. It's like, hey, this is a business strategy I have received, and hence here's a rationale around it.
Right. This is so important for everyone should really trying to not say push, but encourage a company to do strategy planning, just so that we can align our strategy along where we're going to focus our resources. So then it's a lot easier for the downstream teams to work on stuff. Otherwise, use all the fightings and put everyone in the best spot. Nobody have a complete picture on what is really important to the company.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Good question. So any other question?
Can you share again around that prioritization framework wise, what are some of the most effective frameworks you have seen? So I know value over effort, right? It's a popular one. RICE is a popular one. I've heard kind of V2MOM or V2MOM is another popular one. There's a lot of frameworks floating out there, but kind of from your experience, what's one that you find is your go-to, repeated every time?
Right. So I would say there are probably the ones you mentioned are the most popular ones, and I also want to just double click on that a little bit as well. In that, going back to the earlier question, that in the past, there was not a good way to prioritize things. I know, way back in time, you talk to the finance and they would say, oh yeah, you use ROI or NPV or IRR, right? So those are the financial way of prioritize. Say, you have this initiative, what is the 1 year, 3 year revenue expectation? how much resources or how much, how much money you need. So what happened was people would say, okay, they actually sort of deconstruct ROI to say, well, we work on this feature so that it can grow this many members, new customers, and then their LTV is this much, that translated to X number of revenue. Then they will say, for us to do this initiative, we need 6 months of mobile developers and 3 months of the backend Java developers and so on and so forth. And then they convert that all into cost. Then they will calculate ROI comparison, right? And that is very limiting to use ROI, even though it's a standard across the board, right? ROI this one, ROI that one. But the calculation you have to deconstruct to come to that number, and then you have to pack it back to say, hey, did you achieve your member growth later on? There's no way to tie to it, right? ROI is also a way for people to hide behind because you don't have a way to hide it. So what we convert it is, and there's something very interesting, a lot of stuff we're very familiar with the traditional strategic planning is based on era from industry, production. So you invest this much money, you get this much machine, you can create this many mugs, and then the margin of the mugs is $2, you sell 2 million, you get this much, you can do ROI very easily, convert it to it. And there's everything's a standard, right? So machine, mug, standard unity. For software and for product, it doesn't work that way. The money doesn't turn into your engineers, we know, or designers or product managers, right? There's a lag on that, and then you don't necessarily have it. And then you also have existing people. What are you going to do with them? Like, so you have to consider that as a part of the skill sets, right? And then the outcome it needs to tie to your own objectives. So if you say grow new customers, it could be a set of initiatives. Retain customers, another set of customers. Therefore, you could design your own equivalent ROI, but for the technology world, which is the relative contribution of your initiative versus the amount of resources, so that the benefit and cost become something tied to objectives, right? So using an example saying, I have 2 initiatives, and one of them, if I completed 100%, it would help us achieve our objective, let's say growth objective 80%. And the other one, if we would complete that initiative, will help us to achieve our objective 50%, help us to achieve 50% objectives. So then you can compare these two a lot easier. Obviously there's a cost, right? So how many engineering resources or overall resources you need. And then you start to say, if I do both, if I can make both happen, then we have a chance to achieve 100% our goals. If we only do one of them, either one will have the ability to help us to achieve our goals. So we have to start in a different way if these are the only 2 options, right? So that tie the outcome and the benefit for us to achieve the outcome for the initiative, which is basically, obviously it's the estimate, but they help us to decide that in the first place. So to your point, within that objective, you can have a set of things prioritized against each other as well. So what I'm trying to highlight is that there are 2 elements of prioritization. One is do we have a prioritization model in addition to compare each other in a similar category? So rise, benefit, cost are the ones that easily compare within the same category, but it's very hard to cross multiple categories. So the recommendation is to have a category defined first, and then compare things within the category themselves, and then make sure not only compare a ratio, we also should compare the absolute value. So can we achieve our objective by doing these 2 or doing just one of them? If we're not, we can't just go ahead and say, this is the most important thing, we're going to do it and assume we're going to achieve our objective. If we, in the get-go, we already know they're only going to help us achieve 50% or 80% of it.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah. So I think what I'm hearing is adapter ROI, having some sort of trade-off resource and contribution to the ultimate goal. And again, trying to make sure there's some quantifiable numbers behind it. It's not just people's spider senses and feelings.
Right. It's still spider sense, but somewhat we all kind of have to make somewhat of an assumption, but having that tie in the beginning, and also you can come back to it, right? Say, hey, let's just say grow new member account by 100% next year. And then we say this initiative, let's just say we revamp our onboarding that will help us achieve 25% of it. So then we can see that really tied to something, let me clarify, strategic planning, that people think about it versus responsible strategic planning, which is, let's just use the new member growth of 100% next year as an example. And let's say we have one of the initiative, which is to revamp our onboarding with the reporting blah, so that it will help us to achieve that by 25%. So then you will say, I need 2 or 3 Scrum teams and so on and so forth. And then you start executing your strategy for onboarding. And let's say, for whatever reason, you achieve that goal in 2 quarters. You don't have to continue doing that anymore because you planned for 25% of the increase, and in quarters you're done. You can move on to something else. You don't have to work on that. And then maybe you have another initiative that trying to improve the goals. And so that every quarter also you will say, we have these initiatives, and these initiatives are supposed to contribute to these goals. Are we ahead of our goal progress versus our initiative work progress? If they are lined up similarly, continue. If you're way behind your goal versus your initiative, maybe you need to rethink about it. That's where you can do quote unquote strategic planning on demand or revisit. The cadence becomes so important that every quarter also you look at your data, you say, should we adjust our approaches because we're not meeting our goal or we're exceeding our goal? Maybe there are better opportunities we can go after.
That's great. Thank you.
I guess one of the hardest part here is actually getting a product to create this return of the ROIs, right? And sometimes I struggle a lot to get so estimates are easy, ideas are easy, but making sure that people actually get behind if I invest this time in this feature, I will have X return. That's where the hard part starts.
Right, and that's definitely that is so true, and I think that will be a hardest thing for product management. And I'm not saying working with engineers is not hard. I'm not saying design user experience is not hard, but the really hard part is to have a pretty good idea of what that could result. If we do this, what's going to happen? And that was okay for a while, but I think it became more and more challenging if you have limited resources and everyone's competing with each other pretty fiercely. So, it's not like, hey, if I'm wrong, then I'm bad, right? Just like if you work with a Scrum team for the first time, you ask engineers to point things. They never point it right, and they will never be right anyway. But that's the muscle that I think from product leaders need to have, is to say, I know this is going to drive our onboarding conversion. I don't know how much, but let's put a guess. We're not going to tie our bonus on it, but it will help us to learn, are we way off? Are we right? Are we way under? So then you can adjust it. So, even today, every agile teams struggle with the pointing correctly or estimate correctly, but doesn't mean you shouldn't estimate. It's just something you can refer back to say, oh, I thought that, but wasn't really the case. It's something else. So if you think about, in some ways, we as the leaders, we're actually behind our team in some aspects. And think about the agile really started bottoms up, right? Your engineer teams and the Scrum team started to agile. You start to point out things, you start to prioritize things, you start to have a time box of things and try to achieve that. And for us as an organization, regardless of your product manager, product director, or head of product, or CEO, CTO, that muscle is not quite there to say, what is the benefit we're going to be getting, and what our strategy will get there? Can we put a number around it so then we can structurally see it? And it's okay not having it in day one. It can be wrong, but you cannot say, I won't start until I'm perfect. Then we will never get there.
Yeah, exactly. Totally agree. The key line here, most of the times, is getting the C-level buy-in, because, and it's one of the things where, so we are in mid of November. If you ask now the C-levels to say, let's, you all should get together and try to decide what are the strategic pillars for next year or the objectives, they will not have that, because sometimes they don't think in that way. So it's like you almost have to wait for like March, so they get the financials right, they get some sort of idea of what is going to happen, and then they will probably think about the strategy for the year. And I guess that, and one of the other things is that if we think about it in the way that since we started adopting Agile and the Scrum, for instance, like the teams are very scrutinized to the point, to the estimation and the point level, right? So you know everything every day. And sometimes on the product side is hard for getting also the buy-in on the, oh, if I think about, if we produce this feature, or if we develop this feature, we'll probably, and we spend this money, we will get the return. So these 2 points, the C-level buy-in, and then getting the muscle, as you said, and getting people to really think about this, it's really hard. But actually, that's the key to success, because if you have that the company will change a lot, and for the better, I believe.
Right, and it's a very good point, Mauro. I think, right, Mauro. So I think it's a really good point that you call that out, and I want to also pause here for a second. What we talk about here is ideal state, right? But we cannot go from a 0 to ideal state in day one. So how do we even get there? Like, you know, I think almost everyone, myself included, I would say we don't have all the elements. Doesn't mean we're not gonna go to start. And I would really say, no, I think if you cannot do quantitative, you can do qualitative, right? So, you know, in the first thing we can do, regardless your level of a sphere of influence, it will be something say, hey, what is our, let's say, financial goals? Because everyone can pretty clear to say our financial goals, because, you know, it's not decided by us. So are we going to grow 50%, whatever the percentage financial goal, right? So then you would say, okay, if we would say we have this financial goals, where should we go? Should we try to get new customers onboarding? Should we try to get more revenue from existing customers? And should we go sell a new product? And that becomes a conversation, because you can almost categorize things in this like almost 4 buckets of things you can categorize: getting more customers, retain customers, going to a new market, and then test and learn some stuff, right? So you can start with the basically just sort of like or maybe platform, and you can with the 4 buckets. And these 4 buckets will be your 4 OKRs, if you will. Right? You don't have to decide exactly what does it mean you achieve that, because it's a lot harder to do that. You can just decide 4 pillars, 4 goals, or 4 that. Then you can, again, you can use a spreadsheet or whatnot. It's not really that matter, but you can use the strategy board. I mean, use the strategy board, for example. Let's just say we have 4 goals. We want to grow from our current product. We want to retain our SMB markets. We keep losing them. And then we want to grow the new market, and then we want to invest in the future, right? So let's just say we have a couple of buckets of things we could be doing. Then you can start to think about how you even further bucket that. So the initiative will be the level of the view you have here. And think about it. If we were to go to, if I were to go in a way that just saying, here's all the things that we could do, and then here's all the product areas, like, you know, you're just so overwhelmed, say, where do I even start, right? And it's very hard to look at all the product areas, all the product features you want to do. This is already 1 level higher. This is even product features, like an epic level thing, right? Not even stories and tasks. We can't even look at that. And this is still overwhelming. So the way for us to get less overwhelming is to abstract, to be a relatively clean slate. To have a relatively clean slate, and you try to relatively tie them to goals. So then once you start to decide out these are 3 or 4 categories or goals or themes, whatever you call it, the things that we could be doing, and then you have a clean slate to say what kind of initiative, right? Initiative is just like it's a basic bucket of things that it can help you to get somewhere. And then you can start to form these buckets. And then from there, you would say, okay, here's about which one we're going to do, which one we're not going to work on, at least in the H1, H2, right? So you can start to think about, I'm not going to think about anything H2 for now. I'm just going to think about H1, so that the analogy will be something where you pick which route you're going to go there. But how you're going to go there along the way, we don't know yet. But I'm going to pick the pink route. Right, so that's like how you decide on your bucket, and then you pick your H1, for example. And then you get started from there, and then you can go from there further, break down your initiatives to epics, right? So you can then break it down initiative to epics, and then your team can break epics to tasks. So now you have this nice tied up things, and you have new things being added, right? The differences of current strategic planning in a responsive way is that each step the way you only quote unquote break down or decide on enough so that the next phase can happen. If we don't decide somewhat at the higher level, your next phase is just a shooting randomly in a way they think, because they just don't have enough context on what tasks and stories makes sense overall. Question? Anyone else? You guys are quiet.
I just agree with, well, yeah, I'm agreeing with what you said. So sometimes it's just really like putting things into buckets. It makes everyone's life easier because they are not used to thinking buckets.
Yeah, buckets. So speaking of that, has everyone heard of rock, pebble, sand analogy in product management?
Nope.
So there's a really good article around that. Rock, pebble, sand. So Lisa rose hand. There you go, Lisa.
Yep. I think I heard it from you though, so please.
I didn't make, and this is something I cannot claim credit. I think this is something we used at PayPal almost 20 years ago, and David Sachs back then was the CEO at PayPal. And then we use the big rock analogy every year. Strategic planning, the goal of the strategic planning is decide on the big rocks and actually the jars. So the idea is that for any organization or product managers, that you always have a myriad of things that are piled in front of you. There are something really big, complex, and unclear, not nicely, cleanly defined. Those are the big rocks. And then you have those like features and the stories, the UX improvement, there's pebbles. And then you have all those sands, there's just things coming along, the tickets from support, customer success, and so on and so forth. So, and when they all lay in front of you, they all each one stare at you as if they require the same amount of attention. Because when we look at all of them at once, the strategic task and then a tactical task, they all take the same amount of information to process and decide. So the most important thing for us to make a strategic impact is not stare at them in the same way. We decide on the jars or bucket first. So you will say the big size jars and small size jars tied to different objectives or strategies and so on and so forth. And then you look at the big rock first, because these big rocks need to come in first. You don't fill up that with the sand, then your rocks cannot come in. So, this in that way, you put your most brain power, prioritization, energy into the ones that actually matters. The other stuff can fall in and fill up because they really don't really make that much difference in the grand scheme of things. All right. Any other comments, question?
I have one. I'm not familiar with the jar and the pebbles. When you say they're different sizes, would that change quarter by quarter because the investments in strategic themes change quarter by quarter, and that would change jar size based on the types of things in jar? I guess
yes,
there's a lot to unpack in there.
Right. You are very right. I think that's where analogy kind of start to fall apart in that way, where JARS is not flexible. But yeah, it is basically, like you said, where from time to time, based on your cadence, annually, quarterly, you revisit the size of the jar. The jar is only at the strategic level, means that your individual team level don't necessarily decide on the jar. But at the strategic level, the leaders and executives will say, okay, based on how we are achieving our objectives, then we would put we will have a bigger or smaller jar for a certain area. So that's exactly what you said. The jar size itself changes as a part of the allocation, and it's a
Perfect.
part of the portfolio adjustment.
Very helpful. Thank you, Becky.
Yeah, you're welcome. Any other question? So I'm going to take a little bit of a similar discussion and then come to here a little bit. There are a lot of questions. And again, as soon as you mention strategic planning, a lot of people start to think about this as anti-agile. And because people say, hey, you plan for a year, it doesn't make sense. The same thing as a quarterly planning. You plan for a quarter, it doesn't make sense because things are changing. And that in a way is in the past, it is the case. In the past, the strategic planning was done once a year, and the quarterly planning was done once a quarter. And the reason, one of the key reasons, I believe, is because it's so freaking hard to do it. You need everyone in a room. You're gonna have the papers and boards, and you have a lineup of all the teams. It is very expensive. It's very hard to plan. And as soon as after you plan, things change pretty quickly. So you feel like a couple of things happen. One, it takes a lot of effort to plan. Secondly, the plan never really go anywhere because nobody really have the context other than a group of people in that room, right? So as soon as they leave the room, half the context lost. The rest of the organization don't really know. Maybe you have a deck sent out to everyone. So it's very difficult for people to follow, become not very useful. So people use that as a way to allocate budget and you'll be done with it. So that has to change again with better tooling. So then when you have better tooling, what happens is that one, the planning is a lot easier because you can do it almost in real time. The context there, you see the objectives, you have strategies, and then you can see the teams, so that information not only is available for the small number of people in the strategic offsite, it is available to everyone in the company. When you decide to see it, people can actually tie everything back to what was discussed, right? You can tie literally your stories to your epics, to the initiative, to the goals. And the other way around. Obviously, we don't want to go the roll up. We start from the top down. So you do top down high level planning, you visualize your roadmaps and see what's going on. Then you can provide that information to your team and adjust it along the way. So these are some of the top questions. What if the estimate is not correct? What if the estimate on effort is not correct? What if the estimate on the benefit is not correct? But we got to start somewhere because you already made a decision that's based on something. And that decision should be made transparently available to everyone to say, we believe this one's going to help us drive revenue. Even if that may not have a number, I will put the drive revenue in the order of a sequence, right? So I can say this will help us grow market more than this one and this one, so on and so forth. You kind of have a general idea how each of the things contribute to our goals, right? So then once you have the things in the system, and then once you add more data along the way, you can actually track back, right? So it's just a organizational learning process. So then we can actually be responsive at the product level more than just at the task level. Do you feel all right? We have a couple minutes left, so I'm just going to do a quick show on one of the things I mentioned earlier. So how your objective can tie to let me change this for a minute. So what you can accomplish here, for example, once you have a tool, you provide a visibility, your team knows what you're working on, then you can actually say, these are our objectives, and these are our initiatives, and these are our, inside of initiatives, and then we have, product features. If and then you truly go down, you can actually see, and let me see if I can have some information here. So, okay, so this is one example, right? So your team can see something, say, this is our objective, these are the initiative we're working on for the objective. And if I want to go down even see further, I can see, the tasks and being executed here. So I think I did the filter. That's why I was a little bit confusing. Okay, so you can literally create a line of sight for your team in objective, your initiative, and the features and the tasks. So everyone knows what we're working on, why we're working on that. And that would help your team making the right decision. I think the statistics said that more than 50% of the tech debt was because lack of understanding of the product context. So when we give people a bit of information, not where we want to be, they fill in all the other gaps in terms of building product. And engineering is a craft, right? It's not just to mechanically code something. People have to think about where this is going. So when you tell people what we want to be, not necessarily going to be there tomorrow, but they have an idea we want to be, then they can code better. You can actually reduce tech debt by up to half. So giving your engineers and designers the same, right? You give them the context of where we want to be, and then you agile and iterate on a small part of it. So then the vision they have, it will be the same as the vision we have from a product side. Otherwise, the product thinking about something, and because they don't have a context, then your team is built in based on what they understand, and they fill in the rest of the context themselves. So that you create a design debt, tech debt, and the rest is the struggle we have to go through. Until then, thank you, and good luck with your 2021 planning.
Thank you so much,
I'm
Becky.
happy to help too. Thank you.
This was awesome, Becky. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Becky.
Thanks, Stephen. Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Becky. Great. I loved it.
Thank you. I hope you guys should use it. It's like
I want to use it. I like it. I'm glad you're going to send the video out and yeah, it's so pertinent to things we're doing, right? Because it's ubiquitous, right? The information applies to everything, right?
Yeah, it is. It applies to everything, regardless of your service or product.
That's right.
Or marketing, any one of them. That it is so important these days, especially.
Yeah, I totally agree. I love it. Thanks for sharing.
Awesome. Sure. I'll ping you separate offline.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Cool.
Bye.
Thank you. All right.